But of course, there are accusations tonight that the police are effectively decriminalising cannabis use by the back door. So I'm wondering whether or not you think the police are just being way too soft on cannabis use right now. Or perhaps you welcome this move in a bid to ultimately completely decriminalise or even legalise cannabis. Well, let's start this discussion tonight by talking to the Liberal Democrat candidate for Mayor of London, Siobhan Benita. Good evening, Siobhan.
Hello, how are you?
Very well. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Let's start with this rise in the Metropolitan Police use of community resolutions. Do you support that?
Well, it's a bit of a fudge, to be honest. I would actually like to see a complete legalisation of the cannabis market, and I'm arguing that if I was elected to be the Mayor of London, I would offer London as a pilot scheme for that.
Do you think London's ready for that?
I think they are. Some of the recent polling around this shows that there's a majority of people who are in favour of a legalised, regulated market. And I think it's because people realise that we have failed the kind of war on drugs. The figures show today that the police are struggling to cope with this.
But that's a resources issue, isn't it? More than a legal issue.
Well, it might be a resources issue, but actually I would argue that's crime at the moment. So I'm arguing very much from a safety point of view that if we had a legal market for cannabis, we would remove a lot of that power from the drugs market. We would certainly remove a lot of the money from the illegal drugs market that we are seeing. And you could bring in a market where you can control the quality of the drugs that are on offer, you could control the potency, and you would have much more control. And alongside that, you can also put in place better education, better support services, and you can actually encourage less harmful behaviours when it comes to people who are inevitably, let's face it, going to take drugs.
But you accept, don't you, that there are a great many people that worry that scaling back any kind of repercussion for drug use might actually result in more and more people using drugs and actually turning from cannabis to even harder drugs as a gateway drug?
Yeah, I know there are people that are concerned about that, absolutely, and you definitely have to move with caution. And that's why I'm saying, actually, that if you had a regulated market, you could really control some of those elements that people are worried about. What we have now is we've got other countries around the world who are already moving down this path, so it's not that controversial for us to be doing it.
How would a pilot scheme work, though, with respect? Because if you just had an area where you were decriminalising or even legalising cannabis use, then everybody would just go there, wouldn't they?
Well, I mean, I would throw this open. If other cities around the country want to pilot at the same time, that's absolutely up to them. I would very much welcome that. You would have, in a pilot scheme, you could set the levels of the potency that you would be prepared to bring into that regulated market. You could have specific outlets, for example, where you could encourage more people to use vaping rather than smoking with tobacco. There are a whole host of things that you could do.
It sounds like a very expensive experiment. Have you costed it?
Well, actually, in terms of expense, the recent studies on this show that actually having a regulated cannabis market could bring £1 billion of new money into the Treasury because you could tax the sale of cannabis. And if you bring that into London, that's about £500 million of money that could be coming into London that you could use then on support services for people who are struggling with addiction for other stronger drugs.
And we've got to put this in the context of the violence on our streets. You'll have heard today the number of people cautioned or convicted for carrying knives has reached record levels. As Mayor, what steps would you take to reduce that?
Yeah, well, legalising the cannabis market is one of the 5 points that I have in my plan because I'm absolutely saying it's part of making London safer. There is that clear link between the drugs market and knife crime. I want to have more police in the heart of the communities. I want to reopen all of the police stations that have been shut down across London. I want to have an ambitious target so that no child in London is permanently excluded from mainstream school, and the Mayor can help to facilitate that by sharing best practice across London. I want to appoint a young mayor for London so that young people know that they have a voice and a say in the way this city is run. And I want to introduce what I am calling a particular youth focus between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m, where young people really become vulnerable to these organised gangs in London because they've left school and maybe their parents aren't at home yet.
Nevertheless,
there's so much more that we can do.
Absolutely, I'm sure there is. But nevertheless, the law is the law at the moment, and the Met seems to be dramatically increasing their use of these community resolutions. Does that mean they're already busy decriminalising cannabis by the back door, as they've been accused of today?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, one of the I think the the negative aspects of where we are at the moment is we do have this kind of decriminalising via the back door. So we have a situation where people aren't being held to account for this. That's boosting actually the power of the illegal drugs market because more and more people are demanding these drugs. It's just another reason why I'm saying we have to accept now drugs are here to stay, whether you like it or not. I would much rather that we had a system where we can control the sale of that, we can get income from the sale of that, and we can actually use that to educate people into less harmful behaviours.
Do you not worry that by legalising cannabis, though, you're potentially opening the door to legalising much harder drugs further down the line?
Well, that's not been the case elsewhere where it's been trialled around the world. There is Portugal, for example, they have a different approach where they've actually decriminalised all drugs. That's not what I'm proposing. But what I am saying is alongside a legalised market for cannabis, I would definitely like to see much more support services put in place for people who are suffering with addiction with stronger drugs. So the evidence shows that actually, rather than locking somebody up because they have an addiction problem, let's give them support and education and help to hopefully bring them off the drugs that they are taking.
Whilst you're here, Siobhan, obviously you'll have seen today spending on City Hall employees has risen by 82% under Sadiq Khan. How much would you spend on staff?
Well, I can't give you an exact figure at the moment. We're still working up the manifesto and looking at all the costings, but I certainly wouldn't be spending that much. And I mean, when we've got rising levels of rough sleeping, when we've got knife crime out of control, when we've got huge delays to things like Crossrail, you have to question Sadiq's priorities, I'm afraid. And that amount of spending on staff, to me, does not seem appropriate when we have all of these other problems that we need to address.
Siobhan, thanks very much indeed for your time tonight. That's the Liberal Democrat candidate for Mayor of London, Siobhan Benita.